Many people who have never served in the military enthusiastically celebrate Armed Forces Day. They drink themselves into oblivion, as if they were the ones who defended the country and won at least one war. However, there are those who have given many years of their lives to the defense of the nation, but choose to ignore such celebrations. Jack was one such person. He had a modest character and hated being the center of attention, because of which he disliked all holidays. Everyone who knew about his military service tried to congratulate him as loudly and publicly as possible. Jack thanked them politely and tried to get out of the conversation as quickly as possible. But there were people in his life he couldn't hide from, most importantly his wife and mother-in-law. Claire, his wife, and Denise, his mother-in-law, didn't think a defender of the nation should be showered with gifts and words of admiration, which only made things more difficult for Jack. Jack's pleas to stop blindly admiring his past went unanswered. As another holiday approached, Jack began to feel anxious, anticipating another burst of unwanted attention. This year he decided to try something different. He took time off work and booked a short vacation at a resort near the city. Claire wasn't thrilled with the idea, but understood his displeasure at the annual ordeal. She decided to congratulate him on his return and didn't pay attention when Denise mentioned that she too had planned a vacation for the same period. By pure coincidence, Denise ended up at the same resort as Jack. For a few days they coexisted without realizing they were neighbors, living on the same floor. They visited the dining room together, participated in similar activities such as massages and swimming, but their paths never crossed until that fateful day. Jack heard the usual happy holidays, but he felt more relaxed this year, comforted by the thought that no one here knew about his military background. He enjoyed the anonymity of the resort and the chance to finally relax without the pressures of his past. During lunch, however, his momentary peace was shattered. Shit, he almost exclaimed aloud when he saw one of the two people he most wanted to avoid that day. Jack quickly tried to blend into the crowd, thinking to himself, I never thought my army training would come in handy for playing hide and seek with my own mother-in-law. Hurriedly finishing his meal, he returned to his room. He paced back and forth for a few minutes, trying to come up with a plan to avoid her for the remainder of the trip. It didn't take long for boredom to set in, however, and within half an hour Jack found himself by the pool, enjoying the relative quiet as most of the vacationers preferred a quieter pastime. As Jack swam, he noticed Denise strolling by the pool, deliberately stretching out her movements, apparently wanting to show off her charms. He couldn't help but notice that Denise had chosen a swimsuit that emphasized her best features, and even in her 50s, she looked spectacular. Years of swimming and yoga had kept her in fantastic shape, flat stomach, toned thighs, and a figure that demanded attention. Jack held his gaze on her for a moment longer than he intended and shook his head, trying to focus on the clear blue water. Jack, she exclaimed, slipping slightly in surprise and nearly falling into the pool. Hi, Denise, Jack replied, trying to hide his shock. Surprised, she teased, narrowing her eyes playfully. What makes you think that? Jack brushed it off, trying to sound casual. Well, here we are together, far from home, on a day like today. I don't believe in coincidences, Denise said blandly. Happy holidays, Jack, she added, ignoring his attempt to avoid the situation. Jack sighed. I came here specifically to avoid all this attention. Can you understand that? Okay. I get it, she replied with a smile. I won't bother you, especially since I don't even have a present for you. With those words, she turned to leave, her hips swaying deliberately, and Jack couldn't help but stare after her. For a moment she didn't seem like his mother-in-law, but like an attractive, confident woman. He felt a strange mixture of emotions: embarrassment, attraction, and a sense of unease. Soon Denise was at the pool, and Jack hurried back to his room, his thoughts whirling around the room. Back in the room, Jack tried to distract himself with the entertainment program on the television. He even managed to push thoughts of Denise to the back of his mind until an hour later when he heard a woman scream from the hallway. His heart jumped to his throat, and instinct kicked in. Without thinking, Jack rushed outside. He saw a drunken young man molesting a woman, pinning her against the wall. In an instant, Jack covered the distance and twisted his attacker's arm behind his back. The young man cried out, forgetting his victim for a moment as he worried for his own safety. Jack grabbed his attacker's arm tightly, his actions guided by his training as he pushed his attacker away from the woman. "Get out of here," roared Jack, his voice low and threatening. The young man mumbled something inaudible and stumbled off down the hallway. Jack could have easily wounded the guy, but instead decided to give him a quick kick, sending him stumbling toward the fire exit. Turning around, Jack saw Denise. Her eyes widened with shock, then softened as tears came to them. She looked vulnerable, her usual confidence gone in that moment. Gently taking her wrist, Jack led her to his room, closing the door behind them. He enclosed her in his arms, trying to comfort her. She clung to him, her body trembling slightly. In the silence of the room, Jack noticed that Denise was wearing only a thin t-shirt under her jacket. Jack, left shirtless, felt a rush of emotions he couldn't explain. The adrenaline from the confrontation was still rushing through his veins, and the warmth of Denise's body pressed against his was both soothing and arousing. Before he knew it, Denise was kissing him, pressing her lips against his with a persistence that surprised him. Jack hesitated for a moment, his thoughts racing. This was his mother-in-law, Claire's mother. But the poignancy of the moment, the fear that gripped Denise, and the tumultuous emotions between them overcame his thoughts. She pushed him toward the bed, her hands traveled over his chest, and Jack felt himself responding, his own desire taking over. Passion took over and they gave themselves to the moment, the boundaries between them dissolving in the heat of the moment. Later, as they lay together, Jack looked wistfully at Denise and said, "Well, you sure gave me a memorable vacation, didn't you?" Denise chuckled softly, resting her head on his chest. "I guess I did," she replied, running her fingers over his skin. "I didn't plan this, Jack. I really didn't." Jack sighed, mentally shifting his focus to Claire. Guilt began to creep into his soul, but along with it came a strange sense of connection to Denise that he couldn't deny. "I know," he said softly. "Me too." Denise propped herself up on an elbow and looked down at him. "What happens now?" she asked in a barely audible whisper. Jack stared at the ceiling, realizing the gravity of the situation. "I don't know," he admitted. "But we can't let this change everything. Claire, she can't know." Denise nodded, her expression turning serious. "I agree. This stays between us." She leaned over and kissed him gently on the lips. "No one else has to know." Jack put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her to him. For the moment, he wanted to forget the complications and just enjoy their quiet intimacy. He knew the consequences could be serious, but at that moment he just wanted to hold her. The next few days at the resort were filled with furtive glances, secret smiles, and tense moments. Jack and Denise managed to keep their communication discreet, but there was an unspoken understanding between them. They avoided seeing each other, each minding his own business as if nothing had happened. But from time to time their glances met, and a spark passed between them that reminded them of their common bond. One afternoon, Jack was sitting by the pool watching the sun reflect off the water. Denise approached him. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held a depth of emotion that spoke volumes. She crouched down beside him, her fingers touching his arm. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice almost drowned out by the noise of the pool. Jack turned to her, frowning his eyebrows. "For what?" "For being there for me when I needed you," she replied, not taking her eyes off the water. "For protecting me." Jack reached out and covered her palm with his. "Always," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "I'll always be there for you." Denise smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. "We should probably go back to our rooms separately," she said after a moment, reluctance in her voice. Jack nodded. "Yeah, you're right." He gave her hand another squeeze before letting go. "Take care of yourself, Denise." She stood up and gave him one last glance before walking away. Jack watched her walk away and his heart sank with conflicting emotions. He knew it wasn't easy to forget, and he wasn't sure what the future held for them. But for now, he would keep the memory of those days, of what bound them together, and try to find a way to move on. Later that evening, Jack sat on the balcony of his suite and looked up at the stars. The resort was quiet, the day was drawing to a close, and he was deep in thought. He knew that he would have to face Claire soon, and the weight of his actions was weighing on him. But he also knew that some part of him would always remember this time with Denise, the unexpected connection, the shared vulnerability and passion that had brought them together. One day at a time, Jack whispered, leaning back in his chair. The future was uncertain, but right now he was focusing on the present and taking things as they came.